Dr. Sarah Chen had always been underestimated. Standing at barely 5 feet 2 inches with her gentle smile and soft-spoken manner, she looked more like someone who belonged in a library than on a battlefield. Her colleagues at the military medical unit often joked that she probably fainted at the sight of blood, despite her impressive medical credentials. They had no idea how wrong they were. Sarah had joined the Army Medical Corps 3 years ago, fresh out of medical school with top honors. Her family thought she was crazy for choosing military service over a comfortable hospital job, but Sarah had her reasons. Reasons she kept buried deep, hidden behind her cheerful demeanor and dedication to saving lives. The forward operating base in the remote mountains had been her home for the past 8 months. It was a small outpost, housing about 40 soldiers and support staff. Sarah's medical tent was positioned in the center of the compound, easily accessible from all directions. She treated everything from minor cuts to serious combat injuries, always with the same calm efficiency that earned her respect among the troops. What nobody knew was that before medical school, Sarah had spent 4 years in Special Forces training. She had been part of an elite reconnaissance unit, trained in advanced combat tactics, weapons handling, and survival techniques. A training accident that nearly cost her the use of her left arm ended her combat career, but it also led her to medicine. She discovered she had a natural talent for healing, just as she had once had for fighting. The injury had been a blessing in disguise. It forced her to find a new purpose, one that felt more meaningful than her previous life. But the skills she had learned never left her. The muscle memory, the tactical thinking, the ability to remain calm under extreme pressure, all of it remained dormant, waiting for the right moment. That moment came on a Tuesday morning when the base was conducting routine medical training exercises. Sarah was demonstrating emergency field surgery techniques to a group of new medics when the first explosion rocked the compound. The lights flickered, and dust rained down from the ceiling of the medical tent. "What was that?" asked Private Martinez, one of the trainees, his eyes wide with fear. Sarah immediately switched into professional mode, her voice steady and reassuring. "Probably just artillery practice. Let's continue with the procedure." But deep down, she knew that sound. She had heard it before, in places where death was a constant companion. The second explosion was closer, much closer. This time, the ground shook violently, and several medical instruments fell from their shelves. Through the tent opening, Sarah could see soldiers running for defensive positions. The base alarm began blaring, its harsh wail cutting through the mountain air. "All medical personnel, prepare for incoming casualties," came the announcement over the base's communication system. "We are under attack. Repeat, we are under attack." Sarah's training kicked in immediately. She began organizing the medical bay, preparing for what she knew would be a long and bloody day. The trainees looked to her for guidance, their earlier confidence replaced by nervous energy. "Martinez, get the emergency supplies ready. Johnson, clear space for multiple casualties. Everyone else, follow the procedures we just practiced." Her voice was calm, but inside, her mind was racing, processing tactical information she hadn't used in years. The third explosion shattered the windows of a nearby building. Sarah could hear the distinctive crack of rifle fire starting up from the perimeter. Whatever was happening, it was serious. Through the tent flap, she caught a glimpse of Sergeant Williams, the base's senior non-commissioned officer, directing defensive positions. "Doc, we need you to stay put," Williams called out as he passed. "Keep the medical bay secure. We don't know what we're dealing with yet." But Sarah's instincts were telling her something different. The pattern of explosions, the timing, the direction of the attack, it all felt familiar. This wasn't a random assault. This was a coordinated attack by someone who knew the base layout intimately. As if to confirm her suspicions, the radio crackled with an urgent message from the base commander. "All units, we have multiple hostiles inside the perimeter. Repeat, we have been breached. Unknown number of enemy combatants are inside the base." The young medics around her looked terrified. Private Martinez was visibly shaking as he tried to organize the medical supplies. These were good people, dedicated to saving lives, but they weren't prepared for combat. Sarah realized that if the enemies reached the medical tent, her colleagues wouldn't stand a chance. "Listen to me carefully," Sarah said, her voice taking on a tone of authority that surprised even herself. "I need all of you to move to the rear storage area. Lock the door and don't come out until I give you the all-clear." "But Doc, we're supposed to help with casualties," Johnson protested. "Not today. Today, your job is to stay alive. Go, now." As the medics reluctantly moved to the back of the tent, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She walked to her personal locker and opened a section she hadn't touched in 3 years. Inside was a small black case, locked with a biometric scanner. Her fingerprint activated the mechanism with a soft click. The case contained items that no Army medic should possess: a disassembled tactical rifle, custom ammunition, and a set of combat knives that had once been her signature weapons. She had kept them, telling herself they were just souvenirs, but now she knew the real reason. Some part of her had always known this day would come. Sarah quickly assembled the rifle with practiced efficiency. The familiar weight in her hands brought back memories she had tried to suppress. Images of missions in hostile territory, of enemies eliminated with surgical precision, of the young woman she used to be before she chose to save lives instead of taking them. The sound of gunfire was getting closer. Through the tent opening, she could see muzzle flashes in the gathering dusk. The base's defensive positions were being overwhelmed. Soon, very soon, the fight would come to her. Sarah checked her watch. It was 1847 hours. In 12 minutes, everything would be over one way or another. She took a deep breath, feeling the familiar calm that had once made her one of the most effective operatives in her unit. The gentle doctor was still there, but now she was joined by someone much more dangerous. The transformation was complete when she heard footsteps approaching the medical tent, heavy boots moving with military precision. But these weren't the boots of friendly soldiers coming for medical aid. Sarah could tell by the rhythm, by the cautious approach, that these belonged to enemies who thought they had found an easy target. They had no idea what they were about to face. The woman they expected to find was indeed a medic, dedicated to healing and helping others. But she was also something else, something they could never have anticipated. As the first shadow appeared at the tent entrance, Sarah Chen prepared to show them exactly who they were dealing with. The gentle doctor was about to remind the world that some people are dangerous precisely because they choose not to be. The first attacker entered the medical tent with confidence born of assumption. He was a large man, heavily armed and clearly expecting to find frightened medical personnel cowering in the corner. His assault rifle was raised but not quite aimed, suggesting he anticipated no real resistance from what he believed would be helpless doctors and nurses. Sarah had positioned herself behind a medical supply cart, using the shadows cast by the emergency lighting to mask her presence. She watched as the enemy soldier scanned the tent, his movements revealing tactical training but also overconfidence. He whispered something into his radio, probably reporting that the medical facility was secured. When he stepped deeper into the tent, Sarah moved. Years of dormant muscle memory activated like a switch being flipped. She emerged from cover with fluid grace, her combat knife finding its mark before the attacker could even register her presence. The engagement lasted less than 3 seconds. He dropped silently to the ground, his radio hissing with static. Sarah quickly checked his equipment: professional-grade weapons, military-style communications gear, and clothing that suggested this wasn't some random terrorist group. These were well-trained soldiers, probably mercenaries or special forces from a hostile nation, the kind of enemies who would show no mercy to medical personnel. She could hear his teammates calling his name through the radio. They would come looking soon. Sarah dragged the body behind a surgical table and took position near the tent entrance. Through the fabric walls, she could see the silhouettes of at least 3 more attackers approaching from different angles. They were being cautious now, perhaps sensing that something wasn't right. The second attacker came through the rear entrance while his companions created a distraction at the front. Sarah had anticipated this tactic. She had positioned herself where she could cover both entrances, using a metal cabinet as cover. When he appeared, moving low and fast, she was ready. The engagement was quick and decisive. Sarah's training had emphasized economy of movement and conservation of ammunition. Every shot had to count. Every action had to serve multiple purposes. The attacker fell before he could raise his weapon, taken down by precise rifle fire that made almost no sound thanks to the suppressor she had attached. The remaining attackers outside heard the muffled sound and immediately began a coordinated assault on the medical tent. Sarah knew she had perhaps 30 seconds before they breached her position with overwhelming firepower. She used those seconds to move to a new position and prepare for what would be her most challenging engagement yet. 3 enemies came through the front entrance simultaneously, using proper military tactics and covering each other's movements. These weren't amateurs. Sarah's advantage lay not in superior firepower, but in knowledge of the terrain and the element of surprise. They expected to find a cornered medic, not someone who could match their training and exceed their tactical thinking. Sarah had turned off the main lighting, leaving only the red emergency bulbs active. This created a disorienting environment where shadows moved constantly and depth perception was compromised. She used this to her advantage, appearing to be in one location while actually attacking from another. The first of the 3 fell to a precisely placed shot that took advantage of a gap in his body armor. The second turned toward the muzzle flash but found only empty space. Sarah had already moved to a new position. His confusion lasted just long enough for her to eliminate him with a combat technique that would have impressed her old Special Forces instructors. The third attacker was more experienced than his companions. He immediately went to ground and began laying down suppressing fire while calling for backup on his radio. Sarah could hear him reporting that they had encountered unexpected resistance, requesting immediate assistance from additional teams. This changed the tactical situation completely. Sarah realized that this wasn't just a 3- or 4-person operation. There were more enemies somewhere on the base, and they would all be converging on her position soon. She needed to end this quickly and then find a way to help the rest of the base defenders. Sarah made a decision that would have seemed impossible to anyone who knew her as just a medic. Instead of waiting for the remaining attacker to make a move, she went on the offensive. Using smoke grenades she had taken from the first attacker, she created a concealment cloud and moved directly toward the enemy position. The engagement that followed lasted less than 2 minutes, but felt like an eternity. Sarah's training had taught her that aggression, properly applied, could overcome superior numbers and firepower. She used every technique she had learned years ago, combined with intimate knowledge of the medical tent's layout. When the smoke cleared, the medical tent was silent, except for the sound of Sarah's controlled breathing. 4 attackers had entered confident in their superior numbers and training. None of them had left, but Sarah knew this was just the beginning. Through the tent entrance, she could see muzzle flashes throughout the base compound. The main attack was still ongoing, and her fellow soldiers were fighting for their lives against an enemy that had clearly planned this assault carefully. From her radio, she could hear desperate calls for medical assistance from wounded soldiers pinned down in various locations. Sarah made another decision that revealed the depth of her hidden capabilities. Instead of staying in the relative safety of the medical tent, she gathered additional weapons and equipment from the fallen attackers and prepared to venture outside. The other medics were still safely hidden in the rear storage area, and she intended to keep it that way. But before she left, Sarah did something that reminded everyone who she really was at heart. She quickly treated 2 wounded soldiers who had managed to crawl to the medical tent during the fighting. Even in the midst of combat, even with adrenaline coursing through her veins and the warrior part of her personality fully activated, she was still a doctor first. As she worked on the wounded men, applying emergency field medicine with the same precision she had used to eliminate her attackers, Sarah realized something important. She didn't have to choose between being a healer and being a warrior. In this situation, they were the same thing. Saving the lives of her friends meant eliminating the threats that endangered them. The radio crackled with another urgent message from the base commander. Enemy forces had taken control of the communications center and were advancing on the command post. Several defensive positions had been overrun, and casualties were mounting. The base was in danger of being completely overwhelmed. Sarah checked her watch again. 7 minutes had passed since the attack began. She had neutralized 4 enemies without taking any casualties among her medical staff. But the larger battle was far from over. Outside the tent, she could hear the sounds of intense fighting growing closer to the command center. She gathered her equipment and prepared to leave the medical tent. The gentle doctor who had entered this space an hour ago was gone, replaced by someone who understood that sometimes the most merciful thing you can do is to be merciless to those who would harm the innocent. As Sarah moved toward the tent entrance, she caught her reflection in a piece of broken mirror from the medicine cabinet. The face looking back at her was calm and focused, showing none of the stress that should have been visible after such an intense engagement. This was the face of someone who had found her true calling, even if it wasn't the calling she had expected. The transformation was complete. But this was only the beginning. Outside the medical tent, more enemies were waiting, and Sarah's real test was about to begin. Sarah stepped out of the medical tent into chaos. The base compound was a battlefield, with enemy fighters advancing through defensive positions that should have been impregnable. Smoke and dust filled the air, illuminated by the orange glow of burning buildings and the harsh white flashes of gunfire. She could see immediately that the attackers had divided into multiple teams, each with specific objectives. One group was advancing on the command center, another was moving toward the ammunition depot, and a third team was systematically clearing the barracks where off-duty soldiers were trapped. This wasn't a random assault. It was a precision operation designed to capture or destroy the entire base. Sarah's tactical mind, dormant for so long, began processing the battlefield with startling clarity. She identified the enemy's weak points, their likely communication patterns, and the timing they would need to coordinate their various objectives. Most importantly, she recognized that they had made one crucial error in their planning. They had assumed the medical facility would require minimal attention, just a small team to secure it and move on. By eliminating that team so quickly and quietly, Sarah had created a gap in their tactical formation that could be exploited. But she would have to move fast before they realized what had happened. The closest enemy team was advancing on the barracks, where she knew at least 12 soldiers were trapped. These weren't combat troops, they were support personnel, clerks and technicians who had basic weapons training but weren't equipped for this kind of fight. Without help, they would be overwhelmed within minutes. Sarah moved through the compound like a ghost, using shadows and cover to avoid detection while closing distance on the enemy team. Her medical training had taught her anatomy and physiology, knowledge that made her devastatingly effective in close combat. She knew exactly where to strike to disable an opponent instantly and silently. The first enemy fighter she encountered was positioned as a lookout, monitoring the barracks approach while his teammates prepared for their assault. Sarah eliminated him with clinical precision, using a technique that left no time for him to raise an alarm. She took his radio and weapons, gaining valuable intelligence about the enemy's coordination. Through the captured radio, she learned that the attackers were indeed professional soldiers, possibly from a neighboring country that had territorial disputes with the region. They had inside information about the base layout and defensive positions. Someone had betrayed them, providing detailed intelligence that made this attack possible. But as Sarah listened to their radio chatter, She realized they were making reports based on outdated information. The base had been modified since their intelligence was gathered, and several defensive positions had been relocated. This gave Sarah an advantage that she could exploit if she moved quickly enough. The enemy team at the barracks consisted of 6 fighters, armed with automatic weapons and tactical equipment. They had positioned themselves for a coordinated assault that would overwhelm the trapped soldiers through superior firepower and training. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a one-sided massacre. Sarah changed those circumstances. Using her knowledge of the barracks layout and the enemy's positioning, she began a series of precision strikes that eliminated their numerical advantage. Her approach was methodical and ruthless, but also strategically sound. Each engagement was planned to minimize risk while maximizing impact on the enemy's overall capability. The first 2 attackers fell to carefully aimed shots from positions they hadn't anticipated. Sarah had climbed onto the roof of an adjacent building, giving her a vantage point that allowed her to engage enemies who thought they were in covered positions. Her suppressed rifle made almost no sound, so the remaining attackers initially assumed the shots were coming from within the barracks. This confusion bought Sarah the time she needed to reposition and engage the remaining enemies from a completely different angle. By the time they realized they were being attacked by a single opponent, rather than a defensive position, half their team was already down. The leader of the enemy squad was experienced enough to recognize what was happening. He began issuing orders to consolidate their position and conduct a systematic search for the hidden sniper. But Sarah was no longer where he expected to find her. She had moved to ground level and was approaching their position directly, using smoke grenades and tactical movement to close distance while remaining undetected. When she struck, it was from the last direction they anticipated, directly from their rear, where they thought they had secure cover. The engagement lasted less than 3 minutes. When it was over, the trapped soldiers in the barracks were safe, and Sarah had captured additional equipment and intelligence about the enemy's overall plan. But she could see from their radio communications that the other enemy teams were making progress toward their objectives. The command center was under direct assault, and the base commander was calling for immediate support from any available personnel. The ammunition depot was also under threat, and if the enemies captured it, they would have enough firepower to destroy the entire base. Sarah realized she had perhaps 4 minutes to prevent a complete tactical disaster. Making a decision that would have seemed impossible an hour earlier, Sarah chose to split her attention between multiple objectives. Using the enemy radios she had captured, she began feeding false information into their communication network, creating confusion about friendly positions and objectives. At the same time, she moved toward the ammunition depot, knowing that securing it was crucial to preventing the total destruction of the base. The enemy team assigned to this objective consisted of 8 fighters, more than she had faced so far, and they would be expecting trouble after losing contact with their other teams. Sarah's approach to this final engagement demonstrated why she had once been considered one of the most effective operatives in special forces. Instead of trying to match superior numbers with firepower, she used intelligence, terrain knowledge, and tactical thinking to create advantages that couldn't be overcome by conventional military training. She began by using the captured enemy radios to call in false reports, making the attacking team think they were about to be flanked by a large force of defenders. This caused them to redirect their attention and resources toward threats that didn't exist, leaving their actual objective less defended. While they were dealing with these false threats, Sarah positioned herself where she could control access to the ammunition depot while also having escape routes if the situation became untenable. She had learned long ago that survival often depended more on knowing when and how to withdraw than on knowing how to fight. The final engagement was intense and decisive. Sarah's combination of tactical expertise, precise marksmanship, and strategic thinking proved more valuable than the enemy's numerical superiority. One by one, she eliminated threats while preserving her own position and maintaining control of the critical infrastructure. When the last enemy fighter fell, Sarah checked her watch one final time. 12 minutes had passed since the attack began. In that time, she had eliminated multiple enemy teams, saved trapped soldiers, and prevented the capture or destruction of critical base facilities. The remaining attackers, confused by false radio reports and the loss of their teammates, were withdrawing under pressure from the base's regular defenders. As the immediate threat ended, Sarah felt the adrenaline beginning to fade. The warrior who had emerged to meet this crisis began to step back, replaced once again by the gentle doctor who had dedicated her life to healing. But she knew now that both aspects of her personality were equally real and equally important. The base commander found her in the medical tent, treating wounded soldiers with the same calm efficiency she had shown in combat. He looked at the evidence of the fierce battle that had taken place around the medical facility, then at Sarah as she worked to save lives with blood-stained hands that had recently taken lives to protect others. "Dr. Chen," he said quietly, "I think we need to talk." Sarah looked up from her patient, her expression peaceful despite everything that had happened. "Of course, sir. But let me finish here first. These soldiers need medical attention." As she returned to her work, Sarah realized that she had finally found the balance she had been seeking. She was still the healer she had chosen to become, but she was also still the warrior she had once been. Sometimes, she now understood, you had to be both to truly serve others. The attack was over, but Sarah Chen's story was just beginning. Word of what had happened would spread, and people would want to know how a simple army medic had single-handedly defeated an elite enemy assault team. They would learn that some people are most dangerous precisely because they choose to use their abilities in service of others, and that the gentlest hands can become the most protective when those they care about are threatened. In 12 minutes, Dr. Sarah Chen had saved her base and everyone in it. But more than that, she had saved herself. Finally accepting that strength and compassion were not opposites, but partners in the service of something greater than either could achieve alone.